You hear a voice that isn't there. You see something no one else can see. Your behavior becomes erratic, unpredictable, frightening to the people around you. In the modern world, there's a system for that. Doctors, diagnoses, medications, treatment plans. But what happened thousands of years ago before any of that existed? What did your ancestors do when someone in their tribe started acting in ways no one could explain? The real answer is far stranger than you might expect. For most of human history, the line between mental illness and something supernatural was not just blurry, it didn't exist at all. When someone in a prehistoric community began hearing voices, experiencing visions, or behaving in deeply unusual ways, the immediate explanation wasn't biological, it wasn't chemical, it was spiritual. And that single assumption shaped everything that followed, whether the person was helped, harmed, or elevated to a position of extraordinary power. To understand that, you have to go back much further than ancient Greece or Rome. Archaeological evidence suggests that humans were performing rituals around altered mental states at least 10,000 years ago, possibly longer. There are skulls found across Europe, South America, and parts of Africa showing a procedure called trepanation, the deliberate drilling or scraping of a hole into a living person's skull. Some of these skulls show clear signs of bone regrowth around the hole, which means the person survived. Which means someone made the choice to cut open a human head and keep the patient alive afterward. That's not random violence. That's intentional care. But here's what most people miss. Researchers don't fully agree on why trepanation was performed. Some believe it was done to relieve physical pressure after head injuries. But a significant number of cases show no signs of trauma at all. The most compelling interpretation is that it was performed on people experiencing severe mental disturbances, seizures, psychosis, what we might now call schizophrenia, as a way to release whatever spirit or force was believed to be trapped inside the skull. So the treatment was real, the surgery was real, the survival was real, but the framework was entirely supernatural. And that completely reframes the story. Because this wasn't neglect, this wasn't cruelty, this was prehistoric medicine, applied with the full seriousness of a society doing its best to understand something it had no scientific language for. The person experiencing a mental crisis wasn't simply abandoned. They were operated on. They were tended to. They were taken seriously. But the story doesn't end there. Across ancient cultures, something else was happening alongside this surgical intervention. In many societies, the person who heard voices or experienced visions wasn't treated as broken at all. They were treated as chosen. Anthropologist Mirsha Eliade spent decades studying shamanic traditions across dozens of cultures and found a striking pattern. In society after society, the shaman, the spiritual healer, the community's connection to the unseen world, was often someone who had experienced what looked like a severe psychological crisis first, hearing things, seeing things, losing contact with ordinary reality. These weren't signs of illness to be suppressed, they were signs of a calling to be trained. Which raises an uncomfortable question. Were these individuals mentally ill by modern standards? Some researchers believe so. Others argue the experiences were genuine spiritual encounters beyond what Western psychology can fully account for. But here's what the evidence clearly shows. The outcome for a person experiencing these states depended almost entirely on how their culture chose to interpret them. In a culture that saw the voices as a gift, the person became a healer. In a culture that saw them as demonic, the person faced something very different. And this is where everything changed as civilization grew. In ancient Mesopotamia, one of the earliest complex civilizations, mental illness was explicitly understood as the work of demons or angry gods. The Diagnostic Handbook, a medical text from ancient Babylon dating to around 1000 BCE, lists what we would recognize today as symptoms of depression, psychosis, and epilepsy, and attributes each one to a specific supernatural cause. The treatment involved priests, rituals, incantations, and symbolic cleansing ceremonies. But here's the twist. The Babylonian system also included something that looked surprisingly close to modern clinical observation. Practitioners were trained to observe symptoms, track their progression, and match them to recorded patterns. Researcher and medical historian John Scurlock, who spent years translating and analyzing these ancient texts, found that Babylonian healers were making genuine diagnostic distinctions between different categories of mental disturbance, even if their explanations for the cause were entirely supernatural. So rational observation and magical thinking weren't opposites. They existed side by side, woven together in the same system. That's not so different from how the modern mind works, if you're honest about it. Ancient Egypt followed a similar model. Illness of the mind was linked to the heart, which Egyptians believed was the seat of thought and emotion. A disturbed heart meant a disturbed spirit. Treatment involved temple sleep, where patients would spend the night in a sacred space, hoping to receive healing dreams or divine guidance. Priests interpreted those dreams and prescribed remedies. The remedies themselves mixed herbal treatments with spoken spells. Again, real pharmacology wrapped inside a spiritual framework. The two were inseparable. Then came ancient Greece, where something began to shift. Hippocrates, writing in the 5th century BCE, made an argument that was genuinely radical for its time. He proposed that mental disturbances were not caused by gods or demons, they were caused by the brain. His explanation for what caused them, an imbalance of fluids he called humors, was wrong by modern standards. But the direction of the argument was revolutionary. He pointed inward toward the body rather than upward toward the heavens. But here's what's fascinating. Even after Hippocrates, supernatural explanations didn't disappear. Most people across the ancient world, including most people in ancient Greece, still believed mental illness had spiritual causes. The idea that the brain alone was responsible took centuries to gain any traction, and even then it never fully replaced the older interpretations. Which leads to a bigger question. What does all of this say about you? Your brain right now is the product of millions of years of evolution inside groups of people who had no scientific framework for the mind. When you feel an irrational fear and can't explain where it came from, your brain reaches for a story. When you experience something uncanny, your instinct is to find meaning in it. When someone you love behaves in ways you can't understand, something in you wants a cause that makes the world feel coherent again. That's not a flaw. That's an ancient feature. Your mind was built inside cultures that explained the inexplicable through spirits, gods, and forces beyond the visible world. The scientific framework you live inside now is extraordinarily young compared to how long humans have been asking these questions. And so the next time you feel the urge to make sense of something that frightens you, something you can't explain, something that seems to come from nowhere, you're not being irrational, you're being human. You're doing exactly what your ancestors did when someone in their circle heard a voice that wasn't there. You're reaching for a story that makes the darkness feel less dark.